Oyez, oyez, oyez. Anyone having business before the King's Justice of the Superior Court of Justice? Long live the King, the Honorable Justice Hennessy presiding. You may be seated.
Good morning, Your Honor. Your Honor, our first witness today is Chief Duncan Mashano of Bigdegong Nishnabeg. Chief Mashano is wearing his community medallion and wishes to affirm to tell the truth while holding an eagle feather.
Chief, we have the feather that was presented to this trial under Bay some time ago.
Could you please state and spell your name for the record, please?
Duncan Mashano, DUNCANMICHANO.
Thank you. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to the court touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You've been
Yep.
affirmed.
Thank you. As we've just heard, your name is Duncan Mashano, is that correct?
That's correct.
What is your clan or dodem?
Mookie Frog,
And your current job or position, sir, is what?
Chief Bigdegong Nishnabeg,
How long have you been the chief of Bigdegong Nishnabeg?
for 10 years now.
I understand that you were first elected in November 2013, is that correct?
That's correct.
Since 2013, how many times have you been elected chief?
4 times.
Prior to being elected chief for the first time, did you hold any other elected positions with your First Nation?
I was counselor for 24 years.
I understand that you were first elected in 1989 as councillor, and you served in that role until being elected chief in November 2013.
That's correct.
Is the position of chief a full-time one?
The position of chief is a full-time position, paid political position.
Now, as councillor, were you in a full-time position then?
No,
Did you hold any other jobs while you were a councillor with your First Nation?
the whole entire period that I was a counselor, the whole 24 years, I worked for Parks Canada. And I worked in Parks Canada for about 36 years altogether.
Now, your work as a federal employee at Parks Canada was in what role, sir, and where?
I started in Pakasaw National Park, which is on the north eastern shore of Lake Superior. I started as a park patrolman, then a park warden. And then in around 90 or 91, I started as I bid for a maintenance manager position, and I managed to get that position and I stayed there until 2013. I left.
Now, the court reporter and others will likely appreciate the spelling of the national park's name, and I understand that the spelling is Pukaskwa.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? Now, prior to starting with Parks Canada in 1974, did you have any other work experience?
Too many.
Well, let's talk about some of it
Yeah,
then.
well, yeah. I'd like to go back, and I didn't talk to you about this, Brian, but I'd like to go back right to when I was a kid. And I used to sell bubble gum with the cards, hockey cards in it. So a little bit of an entrepreneurial thing that, and I'd get points and then be able to, depending on how much bubble gum I sold, and then I'd be able to redeem those points for different kinds of objects. My brother and I also sold pulpwood, and we'll talk about pulpwood in the Pick River a little bit later on, but my brother and I used to sell pulpwood. We'd pull pulpwood out of the Pick River and sell it for 10 cents a stick to people who needed wood to warm their homes. I then worked for, no, I should be, one more thing. When I was 16, in my early teens, I was in Army cadets. And I spent one summer in Camp Ipperwash in 1961, I believe, and I got paid for that as well. 6 weeks in the cadet camp there as well. Then after that, I spent the summer planting trees with what was then called the Department of Lands and Forests. They paid a salary at that time. I think it was somewhere in the order of $90 a week or somewhere around there. But they didn't do piecework back then. So I worked for that summer for Department of Lands and Forests. I then worked for the Ontario Paper Company, float patrol, loading boats, stuff like that, right around the old Ontario Paper Camp and operations in Heron Bay South and Heron Bay North.
We're going to touch on this, but how far away are the communities of Heron Bay South and Heron Bay North from Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
The community of Heron Bay South, where the pulp operations were about 2 kilometers north of the boundary of our community. I then worked for Kimberly Clark for a period of time, somewhere around 63, 64, 65. Was in the wood yard there for a bit. We were in the service gang. We fixed houses, we mowed lawns, we fixed fences, we did maintenance around the golf course, stuff like that. We also built that road into Lake A, what was called Lake A then. It was where some of the effluent went from Kimberly Clark. And they wanted to drain that lake, so we built a road in there. And there was a bunch of young guys. It was all young guys under the supervision of a guy called Slim Dorman at that time. We stayed in the bunkhouse there in Kimberly Clark, and we ate in the cafeteria that they had there. I'll talk a little bit later on about the differences of staying in that bunkhouse and going back home. But anyways, I worked in Kimberly Clark, and then I worked in the mill and Marathon in the wood yard for a few years as well in the summertime. I finally got a job, I think in 1966 in the mill. And I stayed there until about 1974. When I started work with Parks Canada.
So I get the sense, Chief Machano, that you're an industrious person with a long work history.
Probably about 60 years work history, and I'm still working, so it'll be a few more years added on to that.
Mr. Gover, I know that one thing we missed yesterday, and possibly it's an area of being polite, but I wouldn't mind knowing the age of.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will ask the indelicate question. Chief Machano, what is your age, sir?
77.
When were you born?
I was born November 28, 1945. 1 o'clock in the morning, from what I'm told.
But we have a precise answer to that question, Your Honor. And by the way, we're going to touch on the communities of Heron Bay South and a community whose name we haven't mentioned yet, I don't think, related to Kimberly Clark.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, what is the name of the community related to Kimberly Clark?
Terrace Bay.
And Terrace Bay and Heron Bay South are communities you've told us a bit about. What can you tell us about them? Did they have any historical roots in the territory?
There was no historical roots at all. They were built solely to extract wood from the territory and make it into pulp.
And when we think of Kimberly Clark and Terrace Bay, do we think of a particular product made by Kimberly Clark?
Craft pulp.
when were those communities built?
I believe in the early 40s. Both the Ontario Paper operations and the town site associated with the Ontario Paper operations somewhere around the early 40s. And I believe Terrace Bay, and the town site of Terrace Bay and that mill also in the early 40s.
We're going to come to this in greater detail later, Chief Machano, but can you compare the communities of Heron Bay South and Terrace Bay to your community at the time of your childhood at Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
The town site, the Ontario Paper town site, which was located just 2 kilometers north of our community. We could walk there in 20 minutes. It was that close. In fact, we used to go and watch movies on Sunday nights. 20-minute walk. The town site, the Ontario Paper town site at Heron Bay South was a fully functioning town site, basically. Had running water, had electricity because they had a power plant on the Black River, so they produced their own power. And they had sewage system. No treatment plant. They used to dump their raw sewage right into the Pick River. And then that outlet where the sewage was still there yet. So there was a fully functioning community right north of us. We had nothing. We had no electricity, no water. We used outside toilets. We had to go, and there wasn't even wells back then. The wells weren't built until sometime in the late 60s or early 70s. We had to get water, take water from the creek. So there was a big difference. And again, when I worked in Kimberly Clark, 62, 63, 64, 65, somewhere around there, closer to 63, 64, 65. Like I said, we lived in that bunkhouse. We had showers. We could go for a shower. We'd come home, no shower, not even running water. So that big difference between the municipalities and our community.
We're going to come back to.
Could you, Mr. Gover, could you just remind me, when you said when we worked for Kimberly Clark, was that in Terrace Bay?
Terrace Bay. Terrace Bay, yep. But I also worked in Ontario Paper, and when you were an employee there, you could go in a cookery. They gave you a number with a medallion with a number, so that was your company number. You could go in a cookery, you could eat there. You could also use the showers in their bunkhouse. So my chums, me, Cecil Twantz and Arnold Machano, my cousins, we used to walk up there all the time to go and have a shower. We didn't have showers at home.
And we're going to be discussing Terrace Bay a little bit more later in your evidence, Chief Machano. Can I return to Big Dugong Nishnabeg? And in particular, has Big Dugong Nishnabeg First Nation been known by any other name or names?
Ojibways of the Pick River.
And I understand that Big Dugong Nishnabeg is recognized as a band under the Indian Act. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, we've heard a great deal in this trial already about the Anishinaabe people. Can you tell us about the relationship between Big Dugong Nishnabeg and the Anishinaabe people, if any?
Big Dugong Nishnabeg is part of a larger group called the Nishnabeg Nation. They live pretty well right around the Great Lakes. Have similar customs.
Can you explain what you mean by they have similar customs?
They have similar customs in regards to their Atsakan and their stories, their sacred stories. the use of the council fire in the past, the use of sweat lodges and powwows and the shaking tent ceremonies, the drum, the rattle, all those cultural things that define our nation, our clan system.
We're going to return to the belief system in a moment. Is there a common language of the Anishinaabe people?
The common language, basically called the Anishinaabe Mun, but there's again local dialects.
Can you describe for the court, and we'll do this, Your Honor, partly by reference to a map,
Okay.
roughly where Big Dugong Nishnabeg's core traditional territory is located?
Roughly from the Pakasaw River in the east to an area midway between Terrace Bay and the township of Terrace Bay and the township of Scriber. And then north from Lake Superior to an area north of Caggiano Lake and south of Highway 17 in the north.
So I'm gonna try and get that. Or you've got, you say you've got a map?
There will be a map, and I think we can
Okay.
display it now.
And what, north of what lake?
Caggiano,
Caggiano?
it's a long, narrow lake. Probably about 15 miles long.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And Chief Mashano, are you able to see what's depicted on the screen now?
No, but I can see her screen.
Know what we're going to do?
No, that's right.
And we're going to turn this light on.
Oh, okay, no, that's good. Yeah, I can see.
I'm just trying to find the Pakasaw River.
It's down in the south east portion.
I see the park. I see, okay.
Yeah.
And that might help. So maybe by reference to the map, and I will be asking that it be made the next exhibit. First of all, does this map depict the area that you've just described in your testimony, Chief Mashano?
The red line, the red inside line is what I've just described. And that's what we assert as our exclusive traditional territory. The outside green line is our shared territory with nearby communities. We're at the point where we have made an agreement with the neighboring community, Netmizagaming, we came to an agreement about where that eastern boundary would be, and that would be a little bit farther west from where it is right now, along the Manitowoc Road. You see that road going north, and so it's correct. It's correct, right there. So we've solved that. We're in discussions with Long Lac 58 in the north to try to resolve overlapping issues, and we've got appointments to meet with Face Flat First Nation in the west to try to resolve some of the overlap issues in the west as well. So the boundary may change a bit from what it's like now.
And by reference to the map, we've heard evidence already from you about Terrace Bay. We see it now, and Mr. Bass is helping us using the cursor.
Right.
Approximately how far is Terrace Bay away from Big Dugong Nishnabeg, previously known as the Ojibways of Pick River?
About 90 kilometers, roughly 1 hour drive.
And we also see Marathon farther to the east, closer to Big Dugong Nishnabeg. What is the distance between Marathon and Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
Probably 10, 15 kilometers, about 20-minute drive.
And due east of Big Dugong Nishnabeg, we see Pic Mobert. Is it known by another name?
Net Mizagaming.
And we'll assist the court reporter with the spelling of that during the morning recess.
Mm-hmm.
And you've mentioned Manitouage.
Manitouage and north again, are roughly 90 kilometers and another 1 hour drive.
And Her Honor asked a question about Hukaskwa River.
Pakasaw River. Yeah.
Okay, I'm pronouncing that like a Torontonian. Forgive me. Can you, by reference to the map, tell us where that is, please, sir?
Right on the south end of Pakasaw National Park, you see that big green shaded area?
Yes. I see. So you're identifying an area, and I see it's marked as Puxa River. Is that
Yep.
correct?
That's correct.
It flows right into it's between the red line and the green line?
Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
And perhaps I will ask that that be marked as the next exhibit, please, Your Honor.
What are we at, 24?
I believe 24, but I didn't want to hazard a guess.
Number 23, Your Honor.
Aha.
Aha.
Exhibit. Close.
I'll make a note of it, though.
And this will be called the map of Big Dugong Nishnabeg territory. Should we just,
That's a safe name for it.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. And Chief Moshano, where are Big Dugong Nishnabeg's band offices located?
Located right on our community.
And again, by reference to what we have now as Exhibit 23, how would you describe the location of the reserve, if I can call it that, itself?
Probably right in the center of our traditional, exclusive traditional area,
And where in relation to the Pic River is that?
right alongside the Pic River.
And where is that in relation to the mouth of the Pic River?
Probably 2-3 kilometers, few minutes drive.
Now, approximately how many members are there of Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
There's about 1,200 members, a little over half off reserve. And the rest on reserve.
I'm just looking for, on the map, where it says Ojibways of Pic River, those words, is that close to where the band office is in the community?
That's where it is. It says Ojibways of the Pic River there because that was the name of our community when the claim was launched.
Uh-huh.
We-
Is that this, is that where the community is now?
That's where the community is, just to the left of where that you see that name.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. And thank you, Your Honor. And Your Honor, the next series of questions are being asked to establish the basis for the witness's knowledge of the treaty and the augmentation clause, as well as to elicit some important background information. We're not asking the court to make any findings regarding Big Dugong Nishnabeg's status under the Robinson Superior Treaty.
Thank you.
And with that, Chief Moshano, can you briefly explain your understanding of Big Dugong Nishnabeg's connection to the Robinson Superior Treaty?
We're not signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty.
Was Big Dugong Nishnabeg an independent First Nation in 1850?
They were.
To the best of your knowledge and understanding, was Bigdegong Nishnabeg represented at the Treaty Council in 1850?
No,
To the best of your knowledge and understanding, did anyone sign the treaty on behalf of Bigdegong Nishnabeg?
not that I'm aware of.
To the best of your knowledge and understanding, then, is Bigdegong Nishnabeg a signatory to the treaty?
No, but Bigdegong Nishnabeg are not signatories to the treaty.
To your understanding, after 1850, did Bigdegong Nishnabeg ever adhere to the treaty at any point?
Not in our opinion.
And the effect of that, to the best of your understanding, is what as it relates to the treaty territory?
That our treaty, our traditional territory is unceded territory.
To your knowledge, has that position, that the territory is unceded, acknowledged by the governments of Canada and Ontario?
No,
To your understanding, what has their position been?
both Canada and the province of Ontario take the view that we are adherents to the treaty.
Now, in the next series of questions, I'm going to ask perhaps leading questions. There's no dispute, Your Honor, as I understand. But as I understand, the dispute is being addressed through a title case claiming unextinguished Aboriginal title.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
That's correct.
When did that title litigation start, Chief Machano?
The land claim itself was launched in 1979. It was rejected by Canada and then subsequently taken to court in 1984.
Do you know how Bigdegong Nishnabeg's title case began?
There's a good story there.
Well,
Listen to that.
I'd like you to tell it then, please.
Yep. I started work in Parks Canada in February 4, 1974. During that time, we spent a lot of time training. And because I started as a park patrolman and then moved up to park warden. The roles of both the park patrolman and park warden were there was two roles, they're dual roles. We were looking after resource conservation. That means basically all the wildlife, all the resources that were within that park. And we also had a law enforcement role. So there was two roles that the park patrolman and the park wardens had at that time. So we used to do a lot of training, and probably 90% of our training was in Jasper at the Palisades in Jasper. That was a Park Canada training
In
center.
Jasper, Alberta?
That's correct. And also did some law enforcement training in the Solicitor General's College in Edmonton as well. So we did a lot of traveling to do our training. And at one point, I was in the airport in Thunder Bay, and I was looking for something to read to kill the time, because you have to, as everyone knows, fly all the way to Toronto and then all the way out west. I was in the airport in Thunder Bay, and I was looking for something to read. And I came upon this book called Morris's Canadian Treaties or something like that, something similar. So I bought that book, and when I was on the plane, I started reading it because I was interested in the Robinson Superior Treaty. And when I opened that book and I started reading it, I came to a holy F moment. And because then I realized that we were not signatories to that treaty. And when I got home, from that training trip, I gave that book to a longtime counselor we had there named Arthur Fisher. And Roy Machano, I believe, was chief at the time. I'm a longtime chief as well. And they took that to the Union of Ontario Indians. That's what the Anishinaabe Nation used to call themselves at that time. And the Union of Ontario Indians did an investigation, I guess, to see if that were true. And they agreed that Bitigong Anishinaabe, or the Ojibways of the Pick River, as they were called at the time, were not signatories to the treaty. And that's when the land claim was launched. And the community basically sent a letter to Canada telling them we're not going to accept annuities. And we told the people not to accept annuities as well. And that was all done in 1979 when the land claim was launched.
Right, thank you. And what I'm going to call the holy cow moment, when was that?
Probably somewhere between 1974 and 1979. I don't know the exact date. That's a long time ago. But I have all my training records at home. I should have looked that up, but probably somewhere around 76. I'm guessing now.
Is that litigation that you've described known by any name in common language, in common conversation?
Oh, the Machano case.
Are there any other First Nations involved in the Machano case, or is it just Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
There were 5 others.
And which First Nations are they?
Oh, Nitmizagming, Long Lake 58, Pace Flat First Nation, Rocky Bay, and Sandpoint.
And I missed the first one.
Oh, Nitmizagming,
Okay, thank you.
our neighboring community.
And this might be the moment when we do give the spelling of Nitmizagmig.
I would probably get it wrong as well. But I believe NETMIZAAGMING.
Thank you. What is the status of Big Dugong's case compared to the cases brought by the other 5 First Nations?
Big Dugong's case is in abeyance right now while we are in exploratory negotiations.
And the Machano case itself compared to the other cases, is it farther advanced or lesser advanced than the other
It's
cases?
farther advanced, and the other communities have given Big Dugong the okay to go ahead, and that's why their cases were stayed, I believe.
Collectively,
Yeah.
the group of 6 First Nations that you've described involved in the litigation, are they referred to in conversation by a particular name?
Pick 6.
The Pick 6
Yep.
Pick 6, yes.
and the Pick 6 are the communities involved in the Machano litigation.
Yep.
And the entire action has been stayed?
The 5 other communities have been stayed. Ours is in abeyance while negotiations continue, but negotiations continue with all the other 5 as well.
Thank you. And is it fair to say that a possible outcome could be adhesion to the treaty in the modern day?
That's possible.
Now, on the subject of receipt of annuity payments, can you assist us with this? We appreciate that it's Big Dugong Nishnabeg's position that it's not a party to the Robinson Superior Treaty, but, and you've touched on this already to some extent, have members of Big Dugong ever received annuity payments under the treaty?
Members of the community.
Members.
Yeah, they have.
And of course, you can't speak to what happened from 1850 on, but in your own lifetime,
In my
what
own,
occurred in relation to annuity payments?
yeah, what would happen from what I remember is that the Indian agent and, Department of Indian Affairs, what they were called back then, would come down with all their administrative staff from the RCMP. They'd bring a chest X-ray machine running off a generator. They'd bring a dentist down again. We didn't have electricity. Again, the old drills running off generators. And they'd give out those payments. And it was looked at by the community as well as a whole kind of celebration. There'd be bazaars with games and things to win and things like that. So it was a big event, really.
How much did each person get?
$4.
What would happen to the $4 in the course of the day you've described?
I don't know. I guess, speculate on what people would have done with it. Because personally, I didn't accept it. I never ever went to collect that $4 because I didn't think it was worth it. Up to the time I was 18, I guess my mother would have collected it for me. So I don't know what she was doing. I got no idea. Probably buy clothes, food. I don't know. It wasn't very much money. But I didn't collect it. When I turned 18, I never ever went in there to collect that $4. I didn't want to take the time to do it. It's not worth it. There's one instance on record where that $4 was collected on my behalf. And I believe that was probably my wife after we got married in 1967. But it was only that once because I never personally went to collect it ever.
Were you aware of that amount, $4 per person, ever differing?
From what I understand, it was a lesser amount than in the beginning. But again, I wasn't there, but from what I understand, it was a lesser amount that was increased to $4 at some point.
What about the annuity payments in relation to children? Who collected them?
The parents, I would expect, because parents collected on my behalf, that's for sure.
Now, we've been describing the individual annuity payments to members of the community.
Yep.
Have you ever been aware of Big Dugong Nishnabeg receiving any collective annuity payments?
Not that I'm aware of.
And Your Honor, I'm aware of the time. It looks like it's already 10:45, 11:45, I should say. And I wonder if this might be a convenient time. Well, it's only 10:45.
We had a time change.
Sorry. Thank you. We're going to proceed.
Anytime you want to break, Mr. Gover, just
I will, but
if it makes sense.
I'll certainly move on. I misread my watch.
Okay.
We're going to return to the subject of common Anishinaabe culture, Chief Mashano.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that Big Dugong Nishnabeg is part of the Anishinaabe Society. In your view, what connects Anishinaabe people, even though they may belong to separate bands or First Nations?
First of all, the language, the common language. there's local dialects, but that common language, and language always is the first thing that connects people. The language. You start losing the language, you lose those connections.
And you've referred to the language already by name. It's Anishinaabe-Moan.
That's correct.
And what of relationships? Can you tell us about relationships and their connection to Anishinaabe people?
Well, the Anishinaabe people from different communities intermarried, and that's the first connection. So that you'd have those personal family relationships from community to community to community. For instance, I have relatives down at Sault Ste. Marie. I have relatives in Long Lac. I have relatives in Netmizagami. I have relatives in Fort William. So there's those common family ties as well.
And we touched on the belief system at the outset of your testimony. Is there a common foundational story in the Anishinaabe belief system so far as you're aware?
One of the things that's common throughout the Great Lakes with the Anishinaabe people, and some of the related peoples as well, like the Odawa and Potawatomi, and that's the creation story, the flood/creation story. It seems to be common, and or particularly the flood story. It seems to be common throughout the Great Lakes.
Can you tell us about that?
I can tell you a bit about that. I don't want to go into the creation story because it changes. There's the local variations. But when I first heard about those flood stories, when I first heard about them, excuse me, I got allergies and I took Claritin this morning, so hopefully, excuse me.
By all means, take your time, Chief Mashano.
When I first heard about those flood stories and how common and widespread they are, there's even amongst the Haudenosaunee south of the Lake Ontario, they have a similar story about floods and then their creation and how that was done. It's a bit different, but the common thing is that flood. When I first heard about that, I wanted to find out, why have they all got the story about a flood? Why have they got the story about a flood? Where did that come from? And I'm a prospector. And I understand geology and I understand geological history because it's important for a prospector to understand geological history when they're looking for mineralization. And one of the things that prospectors do when they're looking for mineralization, particularly when they're looking for what's called floats or small pieces of rock that they find that has mineralization, they look at what they call up ice. Up ice. That means the direction the glaciers came from. And the glaciers bring those floats and those pieces of mineralization down. So it's important for a prospector to understand the glacial period and what happened during the glacial period. And so when I was looking, looking for the reasons why there's this common theme amongst the Great Lakes, Anishinaabe and the related tribes, but why is there this flood story? I look back at geological history and I find out at the time when the glaciers were receding, there was multiple catastrophic events creating catastrophic floods, some of which let water, the volume, more than the volume of Lake Erie go in a matter of weeks. And these were caused by glacial ice dams, which suddenly let go. One of which was so catastrophic that it created a mini ice age that lasted for 1,200 years. So then I look at these common stories about the Nishnabik about a flood. And I think, I'm swearing again, holy blah, 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 blah. This actually happened. It was, those stories are there because it was an actual event thousands of years ago. And that's why it's so common around the Great Lakes. But when you look at the history of the Great Lakes, the Great Lakes were higher than they were than they are right now at one time. They were lower. And again, because of the glaciers. And as the glaciers left, there was what was called isostatic rebound. Basically, the land started, there was 2 miles of ice. Where we were in Pick River, there was 2 miles of ice over the land, and that depressed the land. So the land was rising and lowering in different places. So the water would drain off and be higher at some points. There was those catastrophic events that when the glaciers were melting, related mostly to Lake Agassiz, which was a huge lake that covered northwestern Ontario and Manitoba and parts of Minnesota, I believe. And the release of those huge amounts of water. So there actually were floods. And as everybody knows, history has shown that there were people in North America when the glaciers were there and probably living at the edge of those glaciers and witnessing these catastrophic events as the glaciers were receding. That's, in my belief, where the flood stories come from. They persisted down through the ages for thousands and thousands of years. That's why they're common throughout the Great Lakes.
When you say they're common throughout the Great Lakes, to the best of your understanding, does that include Anishinaabe communities that are signatories to the Robinson-Superior Treaty?
That's right, that's correct.
Such as Fort William and Michipicoten and Red Rock and White Sand and Gull Bay?
Yep.
To the best of your understanding, does that include communities that are signatories to the Robinson-Huron Treaty?
That's correct.
So if I understand you correctly, while each band might have certain unique culture, there are common elements to the cultural beliefs and practices that are shared among Anishinaabe people of the Great Lakes generally.
Say again?
Yes, if I understand you correctly, while each band may have certain unique cultural aspects, there are common elements of your cultural beliefs and practices that are shared among all of the Anishinaabe people of the Great Lakes.
Yep, I believe so. Yep.
How far back in time do you understand these common beliefs or practices to have existed?
As long as there was Nishnabik people around.
And how are you able to say that, Chief Mashano? How do you know that?
Through the Atsukan, through the stories of our elders.
Could you say that word again, please, through the
Atsukanen,
Sukani?
basically the sacred stories.
Thank you. Are you able, Chief Mashano, to speak about the connection to nature, that is the land and water, for an Anishinaabe person?
Anishinaabe people have a deep connection to the land and the water because it sustained them for all those thousands of years, basically. And the land also nurtured the animals and the fish and the birds that they depended on for food. So they have that deep, deep, deep connection. And when I look at myself on a personal basis, I look at it also as a spiritual connection because I know my people have been there. Where I walk right now, I know my people have been there. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. In 2016, 2015, we'll go back 1 year, we cleaned out all the portages on the Pick River because I wanted to do our historic trip between Long Lac 58 and Bigtigong, because our people are connected and they used that river. In 2015, I went out to look to see if the portages were still useful, and I found out that they were
Sorry,
all
the what?
the portages were
Oh, portages.
yeah.
Got it. So
Uh,
you clean, in those years, you cleaned out the portages?
we had to clean them all out in 2015, and then on 2016 we made that trip down, and when we made that trip down in 2016, there's a portage at Big Rock Falls. We call it Big Rock Portage, and there's a spot on there where the portage goes over a hill like that, and on the right hand side or the west side it goes down the hill like that. On the east side it goes uphill, so that portage can only go right there. And when you stand there, and when I was standing there, I knew that my ancestors had been there, my grandfather had been there, my great grandfather had been there, right where I was standing, that very, very spot, because you couldn't go anywhere else. So you get that spiritual connection. My grandfather was here, right here where I'm standing. My great grandfather was here, right where I'm standing. So you get that spiritual connection. There was another time, the Mashano family basically hunted and trapped in a community called Jackfish, which was off to the west, but midway between Terrace Bay and Marathon and Bigtigong. And that's where the Mashano family hunted and trapped traditionally. And I used to hear stories from my dad all the time. And one day I took my skidoo out and I wanted to go up to some of the lakes, and I took my skidoo out and there was a trail already broken into a fishnet lake up to Diablo Lake, which my dad called Gemina basically means Devil Lake. And then the trail stopped there because that's as far as the fishermen had gone, because there's speckled trout in there and they were after those speckled trout. But I broke trail from there into Cairngorm Lake, which my dad used to call Trout Lake, or Anishinaabe people used to call Trout Lake, not Cairngorm. And I broke trail into there, and I went halfways up Trout Lake with the skidoo until I came to a point where I had to turn back because of gas. If I went any further, I'd run out of gas coming back. So I was sitting there on the ice, having my lunch and my cup of tea, and in my mind's eye, because of all the stories my dad would tell us, I could see our people going by on the ice with their dog teams and their toboggans. And again, I had that spiritual connection with that place because I knew they were there. Both summer, when the water was open on their canoes, and winter with their dog teams. Again, another time on Owl Lake, which again is north of Jackfish, just north and a little bit to the east, or sorry, a little bit to the west. My dad wanted to go, he always had a connection with Owl Lake. Go, like again. And he always had a connection with Owl Lake, and I always wondered why. He told me that one time he was out in the bush with his dad and his grandfather, his dad Eli Michano, or Eli Mijakovic, and his grandfather Eli Michano, oh sorry, Louis Michano. And his dad took sick. His dad eventually died of TB, but his dad took sick and told him, I can't go any farther. So my dad at 14 years old and his grandfather put his dad on a toboggan and took him out of the bush on the toboggan. And I often wonder if that's why he had such a strong connection to Owl Lake. But anyway, about 3 years before he died, my dad wanted to go back to Owl Lake. The only way you can get in there is by air. So he put up the money to hire a helicopter, and we took in myself and my brothers and two of my brother's sons and his brother Eli, and we stayed there for 3 days. And my dad, again being a prospector, he wanted me to go and look for a rock that he had found some time before the war, the last time he had been there. And so I went around, being a prospector myself, I was right up my alley to go and look around where he told me to go and look around. And I was there in the bush all by myself, and it had rained the night before, but it was nice and quiet that day. And again, I was sitting up on a high rock, having my lunch, drinking my tea, eating my sandwich, and it was foggy. Fog was hanging in the air, but nice and quiet. And I could, that's somebody talking down the hill. It's like I could hear someone talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. And when I got back to the camp, I was telling my dad that, and he just looked at me and he thought for a while and said, must be old George, meaning old George Michano. So you get those spiritual connections because you know that your people have been there. And not just now, not just a generation ago, but for multiple generations. You get that spiritual connection to the land because you know your people have been there.
As an Anishinaabe person, how do you consider the land, the waters, the animals, and the fish?
Well, I look at it as being sacred because you have those spiritual connections all the time. And in particular, the water.
Could I ask one question, Mr. Gover? Chief, you said you went to clean out the portages. I think it was along the Pick River. But you said there was a reason you did that. Because it had been a,
They were
it had been a used as a go-between between Long Lac 58 and
you used to be used as a travel route to get from Long Lac 58 to Big Tagong and vice versa.
thank you.
Used to take 3 days to come down river, 5 days to go up.
Thank you.
And
I think we just answered the question about which way the river flows.
south, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as an Anishinaabe person, Is there anything more valuable than the lands and the waters?
I don't think so, other than your own children.
Within that view to the Anishinaabe, what are an Anishinaabe person's responsibilities to the land and water of their territory, if any?
We have a responsibility to look after it because it nurtured our ancestors for multiple generations. We have the responsibility to look after the land and the water.
When you say look after it, what do you mean by that?
Not letting it get polluted.
I'm turning to a new area, Chief Mashano, and it is the subject of Minnow Bamadzuin.
Mhm.
And it's a term that we've already heard something about in the course of this trial. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with the term, sir?
I'm familiar with that term.
What does the term Minnow Bamadzuin mean?
Means good, the good life.
Is it possible to help us understand it better by looking at the components of this phrase or term, Minnow Bamadzuin?
Yep, and I can do that, and I can do that because I've asked a friend of mine who is expert at doing this, expert at breaking down what what he calls those Lego blocks of our language, and to help understand how our people were thinking. His name is JP Montano, and I'm forever grateful for him for basically saving our dialect and helping me understand how to break down the language. And
That was too generous.
and when you look at those words, you have Anishinaabe words, you have to look at what the literal meaning is, because a lot of the time the English translation of something is not what the literal meaning is. And I wanna go to the word Bamadzuin and the components of that.
While you do that, I'm going to indicate for the record that I've produced to my friends and to the court, and now you have it before you, a chart. It's called Linguistic Breakdown of Minnow Bamadzuin for the testimony of Chief Duncan Mashano. Have you seen this before, sir?
Yep, I've seen this before.
Did you participate in its creation?
That's right.
And will it assist you in giving your testimony about the meaning of this term?
Yep. And we'll do that, JP, and I want to make sure everybody understands that JP Montano helped me develop this, helped me understand, because when I was a kid, I'm going to go back to when I was a kid again. I had a friend called Cecil Ponce. He's a close friend of mine. We used to play, and then after we got to be teenagers, we used to do the things that teenagers do that were not so good. But anyways, he made me understand that because his grandfather was a full speaker of the language. His grandfather didn't speak English whatsoever. So Cecil understood the literal meaning of a lot of those words. And then when he'd say something, he says, that doesn't mean this, this is what it means. So I got interested in basically trying to understand what the literal meaning was, because it helped me to understand the language. And when our friend JP Montano was working on preserving our dialect, I had asked them to try to show us how to break down those words into their literal meanings, because it helped me understand what they are. And he did that, and those little bits and pieces, he called them morphemes. But he had another word for them. He called them the Lego blocks, and I really, really liked that that term, the Lego blocks, because you have one Lego block and you put another one, then you have a meaning. You put another Lego block and it means something else. So those little Lego blocks of our language are, I think, important. And when you look at Bimadize, well, basically it means he or she lives. And basically they've got life. Bimadize. And we've got a good speaker back there. And so you have to look at that and you break it down in the component meanings, component parts.
Perhaps can we break it down in a moment? And I'm just going to ask Justice Hennessy if we might mark this as the next exhibit. I believe it will be exhibit 24.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you. So by reference then to exhibit 24, Chief Mashano, and we have the components of the Bimadize, pardon me, the Bimadize, but I'm going to ask you to explain the components, the Lego blocks, as you put it.
Yep,
now,
and I'll do that. But before I do that, I'm just thinking here about when we attended that sunrise ceremony yesterday, and that elder was talking to us about the word Ode, the heart, and then the different components about the drum and the fire as well. And that clearly illustrates how our people put those bits and pieces together to make words. And I'm glad he did that, because he makes what I'm about to say here a little bit more valid. So you're looking at that word Bimadize, Bimadize. She or he lives. They've got life. So you look at that Lego block, that morpheme. I'm going to call them Lego blocks from now on. BIM, B-I-M. That little Lego block means moving through space or time. So you have that Lego block used in other words as well, like bim ose, you're walking. Basically, you're moving through space and time by walking when you break it up. And then the Lego block add, A-A-D, that being or that character. And the Lego block is the state of. So literally what the meaning of Bimadize, which is translated into English as she or he lives, is the state of that being or character, is that they're moving through space and time. They've got life because they're moving. So, so that's how that word is broken down. And then we'll go to another word, Mino Bimadize. He or she lives a good life. And again, where I look, when I look at that, he or she lives a good life, Mino Bimadize. They're living a good life philosophically, culturally, physically, compassionately. They care about people. They're a good person. So when you use that term, Mino Bimadize, you're talking about a good person because they're living their life good. Now you take that word Bimadize now and you add win to it. That suffix win is what makes that verb now a noun. So you're taking that verb Bimadize and you're making a noun with it by adding win. So you got Bimadize win. It's now a noun. And I and I asked JP, what's the literal translation? He says, nothing. It means life. Life, nothing else. Bimadize win means life.
But when you put it together with
And you put
Mino,
it together with Mino now, it means good life. But being who I am, when you look at life, in the English word, I'm thinking, what does that mean? What constitutes life? What does life mean? What's the meaning of life? And I looked through countless online dictionaries to try to find out a definition of life. And I couldn't come up with anything that I could use here in this courtroom today until I came upon a term, a definition in dictionary.com. You can look it up if you want. And there's 4 different explanations and definitions of what life means in English. The English term life. There's so many meanings really in English. Look them up. And there's one term on dictionary.com that explains life in English. And it says that animate existence, or the period of animate existence of an individual. So that period of life, when you're first conceived to when you die, that animate existence, you're alive, and then you're dead.
now, as an Anishinaabe person, the concept Mino Bamadzuin,
Yeah, the good life.
what does that concept, and we've heard it referred to as a good life or the good life, what does that mean to you?
Well, to me, I'm going to stay here till doomsday explaining this. But to me, what it means is that minute you're that second, that split second you're conceived, you need someone taking care of you. You need all the resources and care and compassion of your parents, and in particular of your mother. You know, you look at that fetus growing, and that, but the 4th week that brain is starting to develop. What kind of resources? What does that mother need now, so that you can fully develop that mind, which is going to take you through your entire existence? So what does that mother need? Does that mother need just a subsistent living? I don't think so. That mother needs good, nutritious food. She needs rest. She needs help. She needs a compassionate and caring partner, so that you can develop before you're born. So where do you get those? Where do you get those resources? And where does your mother get them from? Where does her partner get them from? So that you receive good nutrition while you're growing. And then when you're born, you fully developed now, and you're ready to face the world, and you're born. Is there a good midwife there? Is there a good doctor there? Do you have all the medical resources at can be made available to help you as you're being born? Does your mom and your dad now have nutritious food for you to feed you through your early stages of life? And what are those resources? And again, if you're living a subsistent life, you may not have those resources at hand to grow fully. Need access to good resources to help you live and grow as a child. And as you're growing older, you now start elementary school. Do you have a good education system? Do you have access to good teachers? Is your mom and dad able to feed you good food before you get off to school? And you grow even older and you're in your teenage years now, and you're looking at high school and you're looking at trying to find a partner of your own. And eventually you find a partner and you have your own children. Are you now able to feed those children? Are you able to clothe those children? Are you able to send them to an education system that's going to ensure that they are competitive in the outside world? And if you don't have those resources, is that a good life? I don't know. Probably not. So you have your own children now, and you need to raise your own children. And this happens in successive generations. Do they have the resources to make sure that they can live in a manner which can be turned good? If not, then it's probably a bad life. You grow older, you even grow older. And you start getting weak. You start developing sicknesses. Is there someone there to look after you? Are there medical facilities there to look after you? Are there doctors who understand that? Is there someone who can feed you the right types of food you need when you're getting older?
Does the community have a role in helping its members achieve Minnow Lamadzuin?
The community has a role.
How does it meet that responsibility?
Everyone has a role in ensuring any individual makes a true life with good food, clothes, good education system, good health system. And our community basically tries as hard as they can to meet that role, but we're always underfunded, always underfunded. And every single chief, every single councillor across this country knows that. Each one of those communities are underfunded. We in Victagong go out and look for what we call own source revenue, so we can offset the shortfalls in what we need to look after our people properly, to ensure that they have a good education system, to ensure that their teachers are well certified and paid well so that you retain them, to ensure that the water that you drink is clean and you're not getting sick, and your kids are not getting scabies when you wash them with the water. to ensure that as you grow older, you have the care and compassion so that you can grow old peacefully, basically. And Victagong, Victagong as much as possible tries to look after its people as much as we can, to put together the programs and the services to make sure our people lead a good life, but we're always underfunded. There's not, because we look after everything. You look at municipalities, what do they got to look after? Roads and sewers, lights. That's all they got to look after. We look after everything in regards to our communities and our people in our communities. And we need the resources to do that. And we don't have sufficient resources to do that. We are constantly trying to find the resources to make sure our people live a good life. And that's, and when you're looking at that, that's not, I'm not just talking about the material things in life. I'm talking about the mental health and the education and all those things a person needs to ensure that the next generation lives a better life than I did. And they will ensure that their children and their grandchildren will live a better life. But what does that take? It takes resources, takes education, takes commitment, takes compassion. Compassion to look after each other and make sure that each one of us is looked after in life.
You've
So-
described the life cycle. What is the most important thing for an Anishinaabe parent?
I think to ensure that the next generation, that their children are well cared for. But if you don't have the resources to do that, how can you do that? When you're at a point where you yourself are struggling through life, struggling basically at a subsistence level, how can you then ensure that the next generation lives a better life than you do?
If someone were to suggest to you, Chief Mashano, that Minnow Bemadzewin simply entails a subsistence living, what would you say to them?
I'd swear at them. That's what I do, because it would make me angry. Each and every single parent on this planet, not just Anishinaabe, every single parent on this planet wants something better for their children and the successive generations. And subsistence living doesn't do that. You're too, I'm going to talk about an old elder called Alphonse Moses. We were talking about cultural stuff one time, and specifically the sweat lodge, and I was asking him about that, and I wanted some information because as a young person, I had a curious mind. I always wanted to know things. And I was talking to him about this, and what he told me, I'm going to use his tone of voice and how he used to talk, because when I think of him, that's how I think of him. And he says, we didn't have time for that stuff. He says, we were too damn busy trying to find something to eat. So when you're too damn busy trying to find something to eat, you don't have time to give your kids a good life. living, and that's it. So in order to give your kids a better life, in order for them to give a better life, you need additional resources. And where those additional resources come from that are above the subsistence level. When you're living at the subsistence level, you're living, and that's it. You're alive. You're not dying. How do you make those next generations better? The goal of every parent to make that next generation better needs resources. Resources that usually come from the land, our land. And resources that were not shared with us, really. They're gone, they're taken. And because they were taken, the whole operation, I guess, of removing those resources put our people even in a position where their ability to feed their families was put at risk because those resources were being taken from the land. So when you look at that whole concept of Mino Bimadzuan, the good life. So what is the good life? And I hope I tried to explain that a lot better. And in particular, that idea that you want to make the successive generations better. And I think that's the goal of every parent in this planet, including Anishinaabe parents.
Thank you, Chief Mashano. Your Honor, I've regained my ability to tell time. I wonder if this might be a convenient time for the morning recess.
Very good time.
Thank you.
15 minutes to it.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we'll take a break now for 15. Thank you.
All rise. We'll recess for 15 minutes. This court will now resume. You may be seated.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief Mashano, prior to the break, you described cultural activities of the Anishinaabe people in the context of Mino Bimadzuin. Do those activities include hunting and fishing and being on the land?
They do.
Is access to financial resources, does it play any role in the ability to pursue those cultural activities?
There is a need for financial resources now more than ever, because as non-Indigenous people moved in, they were using up the resources as well. And I'm not talking about mining or forestry, but the resources that the Anishinaabe needed to live off the land at that time. One of the things that the Anishinaabe people depended heavily on back then was caribou and snowshoe hare. Snowshoe hare lived in a cyclical basis, basically an 8 years cycle. Caribou were still along the North Shore. With the building of the CPR Railroad, those caribou started to disappear. And they were starting to disappear because there was competition by non-Indigenous hunters and specifically meat hunting parties that that were put out by the people building the CPR Railroad. So they were competing for the resources that the Anishinaabe needed. And it was the same in the summertime. We did an archaeological dig. I shouldn't say we assisted with an archaeological dig at the mouth of the Pic River in 1959, I believe 60. So it would be around 1960, because I remember I was 15 years old at the time. And the dig was done by Professors Emerson and Dawson from Lake Edu. And they had their group of young archaeologists working there. And they used to show us how to look for things in those squares that they had set up. They'd give us a trawl and we'd help. And what I found, there was other bones there, beaver bones, caribou bones, stuff like that. But overwhelmingly, what you found in those pits were fish bones. Our people depended heavily on fish during the summer, because that huge lake that was right next door to them was full of fish, billions of fish, and which was eventually destroyed really by the building of the Welland Canal and commercial fishing, the lamprey. But they depended on those fish overwhelmingly during the summer, but other animals as well. But in winter, it was caribou and snow-toed hare, because the fish were too hard to get, the ice frozen. So there was competition for those resources. So you needed to start to think about, what am I going to do here? I need to buy traps. I need to buy an axe. I need to buy a knife. I need more resources now to compete. Typically in the winter, they used to use deadfall to trap there. And the old man showed us how to do that as well one time, and how to use spring pole. And I tried it out, and I tried it out. Again, this curious kid. I tried it out using fish line and spring pole, and it worked. And it actually worked. But again, competition from the non-Indigenous people who were gradually and quickly moving in. So they had to go farther. They had to hunt harder. They needed new tools to do that. So they needed steel traps. They needed steel knives. They needed axes, files, the whole bit, needles and awls to help dry your beaver skins. You needed all those things. If you have your family in there, you need cooking tools, you need the whole bit. It's not simply going out there and using birch bark for everything. So you needed the cooking tools, pots, pans, the whole bit that you needed to feed your family while you're in the bush, the whole bit that you needed to go trapping and hunting to help feed your family, because you were getting competition now. You weren't there alone. And way back when, people, both Anishinaabe and non-Indigenous people, were allowed to hunt and trap anywhere you wanted to go. So there was a lot of competition. So you needed financial assistance to help you buy that stuff. What a lot of storekeepers did, including the Hudson Bay, they would give you stuff on debt. They give you stuff on debt, so you could buy this stuff, and then when you came back in the spring, you paid that off when you sold your fur. So you always needed financial assistance basically to help you, to help you. And nowadays it's even more so. You need skiddles, you need ATVs, you need boats, you need motors, the whole motorized trapping industry, because nowadays the prices are so bad that you have to travel farther, you have to take more. So financial assistance is always crucial. Same with fishing and buying nets and buying boats. Lake Superior is a huge lake. You need good boats. And in
That
some
leads
ca-
to my question then, how might additional financial resources have assisted individual members in these activities or pursuits or to achieve Minnow Bemadzewin?
Well, there's lots of things I think about when I think about how an individual, if that individual had access to additional resources, how they could make their life better, and how they could even start businesses. That lake was full of fish. That lake was full of fish until I believe it was the early 50s when they put in the Welland Canal and they let the lamprey in. And then overfishing by commercial fishing as well, so to both of them. But I think about that lake, and I think about a story I was told by someone about old George Michano. Putting out his net in Heron Bay, get a little wooden punt, little wooden rowboat, basically. And he'd go and check his nets and the fish he'd catch. He'd take them up to Heron Bay and sell them on the CPR passenger train, specifically number 7, because number 7 went west. And you see how nosy I am, really. I asked a former CPR employee, how were those trains numbered? And he told me odd numbers went west, even numbers went east. So now I know the number, that was number 7 that was going west. And he'd sell that fish, and I keep thinking to myself, old George had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. He was catching those fish and selling them on the CPR train. What if now? What if he had additional resources and he could buy a bigger boat? And he could hire someone to give him a hand. And he could set out more nets and create a business for himself. What if he had that opportunity? Because the fish were still there. I also look at photos that community members exchange all the time over Facebook. They love putting photos on Facebook. And I see a photo of a guy called Tommy Starr. He lived in Coldwell, Port Coldwell, which was a fishing village. And
Port Coldwell, is it?
yep, Port Coldwell. And another community member, Charlie Twants. And I see them at the back of one of those steam-driven tugboats with their gear. You know, they're fishing because they got those sleeves that prevent the nets from getting caught and tangled.
For the record, you're pointing up to your forearm.
Forearm up to the elbow. But their sleeves basically the fishermen put on. They still use them actually. So the net don't get tangled on buttons and watches and stuff like that. And I see those photos, And those guys obviously know how to fish because they're on that tug, giving, helping out whoever owned that tug, which was probably the Nickel brothers from Port Colwell. That's who ran the fishery there. And I keep thinking, they knew how to fish. They knew how to operate that tug. What if they had additional resources where they could buy their own tug and run their own commercial fishery? So it's those kinds of things. I think about my grandfather, Eli Mijak Benes. I have a photo of him on Mountain Lake, that's in Jackfish, with an American tourist. And I asked my dad, why was that American tourist there? He said he was guiding for the hotel owner at Jackfish. And then I think, what if he had his own additional resources where he could start his own business and run a tourism operation by himself? He obviously don't know how to guide. Things like that. I look at people like Katie McQuaig and old Spadoni, who used to buy. There were storekeepers, one in Scriber, one in White River, and then McQuaig in Heron Bay, who used to buy fur from the Anishinaabe people. And I keep thinking, what if some entrepreneurial Anishinaabe actually had enough money to go out there and buy those furs from the Anishinaabe themselves and make money from selling them in Montreal, where they typically sent all the furs at that time. Now it goes all over the world now, but Montreal at that time. What if they had the resources to be able to do that? You know, there's all kinds of different things that our people could have done had they had the resources to try to participate in that economy more and become entrepreneurs, basically, and business people. And again, I say our people were always entrepreneurs. When I was young, Matt Michano and his wife Adeline had a store on the reserve. There was no electricity, but they had I believe a freezer that used to run off naphtha or coal oil. I forget what it was, but it was a freezer. So they used to have ice cream and popsicles and stuff like that, and pop and chips and things like that. And I keep thinking, what if they had additional resources now where they could expand that to sell more goods and services, like Katie McQuaig was doing in Heron Bay, like Fernand LaCour was doing in Heron Bay, selling clothes and hunting items.
And you mentioned George Michano.
And George Michano, but again, with the commercial fishing. Eh? So what if they had those additional resources? Would they been able to do that? And I think they would, because they were doing it already, but only at a small scale, because they couldn't expand. They didn't have the resources to expand.
Now I'm going to turn in a related way to mineral extraction in the territory. And in particular, can you explain to us whether the people of Bigdegong Nishnabeg, had they had additional resources, how would they have participated in exploitation of minerals in your territory?
Our people basically were prospectors. They understood minerals. My dad, his grandfather, Louis Michano, he used to tell me all the time when they were traveling from Jackfish to Owl Lake in the wintertime. Then my grandfather will always point that rock, that's where my mine is. Well, he never ever had the resources to develop what he's thinking about as his mine. You look at people like Moses Fisher, who had a strong background in prospecting. And he understood, we had a canoe route, let's go back. We had a canoe route going up the Pick River over to Namay, and Namay Creek, up the Namay, and then into Manitouwadge Lake. And then we'd come down through the Black River, because the Black River, the rapids in the Black River are too fast. So it was easier to go up the Pick, even though there was current. Portage over and come down the Black. And the people in Mizagaming used that area as well, around Manitouwadge Lake. But Moses Fisher, being a prospector, knew that there was mineralization there. He recognized it. And he took a government geologist named Thompson up to Manitouwadge and showed him that mineralization. And Thompson recognized right away in Fox Creek that the mineralization that they were looking at was malachite, basically, copper staining. And he advised Moses Fisher to stake that area, and Moses Fisher did that. And Moses tried to sell those claims, and he never could. He didn't. Number one, he didn't have money to expand the property. You could only get there by canoe. You're able to hold your claims for 2 years. He tried to sell them, but he couldn't, and they lapsed. And again, he didn't have money for the exploration part of things. He didn't have money for assays, because you take a rock and you assay them, then you find out what the content in them are. So he didn't have money to do anything like that, but he was trying to sell that, but he never could. And the claims came open.
What happened then?
Subsequently, a teacher and two of their friends from Geraldton found out about that mineralization. They flew in there by a plane and they restaked it. And because they had the resources to do the exploration, they had the resources to do the assays, they sold that property, and that's what became the GECO and the Wilroy mine in Manitouwadge. So they benefited from that. And Moses Fisher never did benefit from it, basically because he didn't have the resources to explore and push that property. He didn't have the resources to go back in there and stake it again, because of 2 or 3 day travel up the river by canoe to get to that site, because there was no road then. There was no railroad there. It was wilderness. So he lost out basically because he didn't have the resources to expand that and explore that property. But the guys from Geraldton did.
Guys from where?
Geraldton.
Oh, Geraldton,
Ontario.
thank you.
And you told us they flew in.
They flew in. They hired a plane, flew in.
And you mentioned that the property was developed as the GECO mine
GECO mine and the Wilroy mine.
and the Wilroy mine. And is
Yeah.
that GECO, GECO? and
GECO.
Wilroy,
Yeah.
WILROY?
Yep.
How
And-
long
and-
were those mines in operation? Do you know?
30 years. 30 years extracting copper, zinc, nickel, and lead. And 30 years, it was a productive mine, because 30 years for a base metal mine is a long time. Typically, base metal mines will are depleted in about 10 or 15 years.
When you refer to base metals, what are you referring to? What kinds of minerals?
Just what I mentioned, copper, zinc, lead, nickel, those are what's called base metals, not precious metals like silver and gold.
And Professor Stiglitz, when he testified, discussed a hypothetical of a gold mine next to a First Nation. Now we're going to talk about the Hemlo mine. And what was the level of knowledge at Big Dagong Nishnabeg, if any, about gold in the vicinity of the First Nation and especially at the area that we know as Hemlo?
A family called the Moses family, and specifically Peter Moses's family, lived north of the railroad track beside a small lake between that railroad track, the CPR tracks, and what is now Highway 17. And they had a little cabin there. And that Moses family, again, were prospectors. They knew about mineralization. One of their family members, Moses Piconegay, discovered that showing in Heron Bay, just between LeCour's store and the CPR tracks. It was mined. It took a little bit out of there, but it really wasn't very productive. But the point is, they knew. They were living, like I said, north of the railroad tracks at Hemlo, beside that small lake. And one of the Moses family found mineralization basically north of where now the Highway 17 is.
Can I interrupt for just a moment? I omitted to ask you about Manitouage and Moses Fisher. When that happened, that essentially the stake lapsed and the three people from Geraldton flew in, approximately when was that?
That would be in the 1940s sometime. And the mine basically was opened, I believe, in 1953. So it would have been late 40s, early 50s sometime.
And then when we talk about Peter Moses and Hemlo, what time frame are we talking about there?
Probably back in the 30s. Probably back in the 30s or early 40s. Because that area lay dormant for a long time. Again, that mineralization was found by a member of the Moses family who told a local prospector named Harry Ullman about that. Harry Ullman then bought a friend from the United States called Williams, and they then staked the place and did some exploration, and the area kept changing hands over and over by various mining companies until the early 1980s, when two prospectors called Larch and McKinnon recognized that was probably potential there, and they staked it.
Can I interrupt for a moment? Mr. Ullman, Mr. Williams, Mr. Larch, and Mr. McKinnon, were they indigenous or non-indigenous?
Non-indigenous.
So you've now taken us up to somewhere around what year?
Early 80s, around 1982, somewhere around there. There was a big staking rush, really. But first of all, Larch and McKinnon recognized that there might be potential here, and they bought in a promoter called Murray Pezim, and Murray Pezim that put up all the money, basically millions of dollars to explore that thing. And they hired they hired a geologist named Robert Bell. And Bell was persistent. And Pesum had the money. And they put in 76 holes before they finally hit what they were looking for, the sufficient mineralization and tonnage, basically, to warrant. And that's when the big staking rush, everything for 100 kilometers around that area was staked up. So it was developed as a mine, first the Williams mine, then Tech Corona, and then Newmont, because they all had different claims. And the point is that those Nishnabeg who originally found it got nothing out of it. Nothing out of it, again, because they have to bring someone in to develop it who bought in somebody else. And I have no idea what they ever got for them for that, for showing them that showing. But I suspect probably nothing or some meaningless thing. I don't know. The point is they didn't get rich on it, but they found it. But if they had additional resources, could they have done that themselves? They probably could have, because they had the knowledge. They were prospectors. They knew these things.
How far is the Hemlo mine? And I appreciate it's had a couple of names, Tech Corona and the Williams mine. How far is that from Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
About 26 clicks in a straight line.
How long would it take to drive there?
25 minutes, half an hour. Something like that.
And I'll say parenthetically, lawyers in the room know that that's the property that was the subject of the Lacan Corona case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada.
And Sudbury people know that there was a famous Sudbury prospector called McKinnon who
Yep.
talked about it.
There we are.
It's a known story.
Yep.
Well, we're on the subject of distances, Chief Marciano. Of course, we know that the Canadian Pacific Railway line, and you've referred to it, you've referred to the number 7 train. It was put through, if my history from high school stands me in good stead, in the 1870s.
Somewhere around there.
And how far is the CPR rail line from Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
Probably about 4 or 5 kilometers.
How far is Highway 17 from Big Dugong Nishnabeg?
Probably about 8 or 9 kilometers.
How might additional financial resources have assisted individual members in the activities and pursuits you've described in their pursuit of Minnow Bimadzuin?
Say again?
How might additional financial resources have assisted individual members of Big Dugong Nishnabeg in their pursuit of the activities that you've described as they strove to achieve Minnow Bimadzuin?
Right, right. Well, additional resources would have given them the capacity basically to build those businesses, basically, because they knew what they're doing. You go back to Charlie Thompson and Tommy Starr, they knew the business. When I go back to George Machano, he knew how to do these things, and he was selling fish already, but at a small scale. He could easily have gone bigger. Yeah, you talk about Matt and Adeline and their store on the reserve. They could have easily gone bigger had they had the capacity to and the resource to do so. You look at Moses Fisher, and then in particular Moses Fisher, because he had those claims staked. that he had additional resources, he could easily, and all that revenue would have come into a member of Big Tagong, instead of going to someone in Geraldton.
Moving away from individual members, what are some of the ways that Big Dugong Nishnabeg would have used additional financial resources to assist its members in attaining Minnow Bamadzuan?
Well, I keep thinking again about the business side of things. First of all, we'll talk about other ways in a bit, but I keep thinking about the business side. Could Big Tagong or Jibways of the Peck River, they're known then, had they had access to additional resources, develop that fishery on their own to help their people. And, not just a single private guys trying to do it. Maybe Big Tagong could have done that. Could they have developed an agricultural economy, basically, because we've got good soil in the Pick River Valley for that. The growing season is not long, but you can still grow potatoes. You can grow some of the root vegetables, but not to a big size because the season is so short. And in fact, they did raise some cattle. They did have gardens, in particular potato gardens when I was young. I used to see barbed wire strung along the bush lines, and I was wondering what that was for. And I asked my dad one time, why is there barbed wire all over the place? He says, people used to have cows, is what he said. So they strive to do that, but if they had additional resources, could they have actually expanded on that and been more successful because you've got those resources to buy all the implements that you need to be successful in agriculture? So there's all those things, and then when you look at the services, if Big Tagong, the community, had access to more revenue, could they then now have started building their own schools, paying their own teachers, building their own healthcare systems? We don't know, and we're never going to know because they didn't have access to the resources to be able to do that.
Can you tell me about if a woman was about to have a baby in the community around the time you were born, 1945?
Mhm. Mhm.
What was done?
The mothers at that time had to go to if there was a midwife in the family, they'd use a midwife, but they had to go to Thunder Bay. They had to travel by train to go to Thunder Bay, despite the fact that there was a hospital in Marathon. They traveled by train, and my mother probably delivered at least 3 more of my siblings younger than me in Thunder Bay because they couldn't have access to a hospital in Marathon. I remember a case of a mother who gave birth right on the train. And the baby was delivered by the conductor on the train.
And can you tell us the vignette about the name of the daughter and the name of the conductor?
Yep. The child was a boy. And his mother named him Jack. And his mother named him Jack because the conductor who delivered him was a well-known politician named Jack Stokes. He was a conductor on the train at the time. So he was, that's how Jack, I'm not going to say his last name, forgot his name. He was basically named after the conductor who delivered him, who was Jack Stokes.
And went
Yeah,
on to a political
yeah,
career.
That's right.
Are you going to ask why the hospital in Marathon was not accessible?
I got no idea.
Oh.
I got no idea. I couldn't tell you. You know, I never did ask my dad or my mother why they had to travel all the way to Thunder Bay to deliver babies. And I remember that well because I had to go and live with my dad's aunt, Agnes, in Port Colwell, while my mother was in Thunder Bay having babies. So I spent a lot of time in Port Colwell with my dad's aunt.
When was that hospital in Marathon built?
Good question. Good question. Probably in the 40s when the mill went in.
And on
But
this
but
subject,
it was there.
and that's the point of
Yeah,
Her Honor's question.
yeah.
On the subject of what Big Dagong Nishnabeg would have done with additional financial resources to assist its members, can you tell us about the road system historically? We know Highway 17 was, did you say nine kilometers away?
Something like that, yep.
Tell us about how you got to Big Dagong Nishnabeg from Highway 17 or anywhere else by road.
Well, Highway 17 didn't go in until somewhere around the late 50s, I believe. And a few years later, Highway 627 went down from Highway 17 to Big Dagong. But most of the travel prior to that was done by train. We traveled back and forth by train. When I was working in Terrace Bay, even during the 60s, I was a young man. I didn't have a vehicle until, I don't know, 1966 or something like that. But I used to travel back and forth to go and visit my girlfriend in Netmizagaming by train. Go there by train, and I'd go back to work by train.
And historically, had there been resources such as you've referred to, healthcare resources, social institutions and schools, was there any level of interest on the part of the community to establish those institutions at Big Dagong?
Back then, I don't know, but there is now.
And we'll
Well,
come. Sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't living back then, so I don't know.
And if there had been resources like that in the community, how would members of the community have reacted in relation to other communities? In other words, do you have an issue with members of your community staying there, or do they move on?
I'm not
I haven't
sure.
put that clearly. Let me
Mhm.
put it this way. Do you have any problem with retaining, historically, has Big Dagong Nishnabeg had a problem with retaining its members?
Yep, yep. Particularly well-educated people who need jobs. You know, other than what was that Ontario paper, and that was seasonal work, and what was in Marathon year-round. Big Dagong didn't have an economy. So our people, once they got educated, moved away. That's why half of our people live off the reserve. It was for economic reasons. So you're losing all the well-educated people, and they're going somewhere else. We've got a lot of lawyers. We've got quite a few doctors. And you know where they are?
Where?
Not on Big Digong. They're out there.
And Chief Mashano, if Big Digong Nishnabeg had increased funding now, what would your priorities be for the use of that money?
The first thing we would focus on is infrastructure, because there's always a challenge. There's always a challenge in maintaining infrastructure. Again, because of the inadequate and underfunding that comes down from the federal government. So the number one priority always is that infrastructure, keep the water system going, keep the fire protection going, the whole bit. So again, that inadequate funding that comes down from the federal government and our search for own source revenue to top those things off. So that would be our number one priority to deliver. So we're able to deliver those services to our people. But we also now are looking at, we've got a brand new clinic, and we're looking at now trying to build up that clinic to a more substantial healthcare facility. We're looking at the possibility of, can we bring in a doctor? Can we hire a doctor? Where's the money going to come from? Can we hire a nurse practitioner? Where's the money going to come from? Can we hire a dentist? Where's that money going to come from? Those kinds of things. Mental health, the social services sector. Our people have a lot of addictions because of the social issues that they face. How do we deal with that? The mental health system in Ontario is broken. It was taken apart by the Conservative government long ago, during the Mike Harris days. So the mental health system is broken. How do you put that all together in a comprehensive, integrated fashion so that the medical services, dental services, mental health services are all integrated? The social services are all integrated. So all these people talk to each other and at a community level. Because when you look at it in the municipal and the provincial level, all these things work in silos. Nobody from the medical system talks to anybody in the social services system. And nobody from there talks to the people in the mental health system. They all work separately and it's broken.
Chief Mashano, you've described the reserve, if I can call it that. You've told us where it is. It has how many acres?
800 acres.
You've also told us about the connection with the land.
Correct.
With augmented resources, would Big Digong Nishnabeg do anything else?
Well, we've only got 800 acres of land, and most of that is organic, covered with about 4 to 5 feet of organic soil. Right now, we're in a bit of a housing crisis, and we're working on our water system, but we're doing a geotech to try to find enough solid land to put additional houses. What we could do with additional resources is to actually buy land. And that's not an issue, really, to try to buy land and convert that through the ATR process into reserve land.
And through the what
The
process?
ATR, the addition to reserve process.
You've referred to water.
Mhm.
And what would you do if you had augmented resources as it relates to drinking water?
Again, we go back to that whole issue about funding from the federal government in regards to all these services. It's not hard. Well, sometimes it's real difficult, really, to tell you the truth, but it's relatively easy to get some of those infrastructure things put into place. But nobody provides maintenance money. Nobody provides training money to keep those infrastructure projects going. If there's a water plant built, nobody, we gotta find the money to train our guys. We gotta find the money to maintain them. And our fire guys, we gotta find the money to provide honorariums for them. The federal government will buy you a nice shiny red fire truck, but they won't give you money to train the guys. They won't give you money to maintain that truck. They won't give you money to pay for the hydro in the building and the building that you put that fire truck in. We have to find that somewhere. So to provide those services with those inadequate resources, we're always looking for additional money. Where do we find money now? Same with the school system. When you look at the school system, even we're in an agreement with Ontario and Canada through the Anishinaabe Nation or /OY self-government agreement in regards to education. We call the AES, Anishinaabe Education System. It provides a bit more money, but it's still underfunded compared with the municipalities and the school boards. Still underfunded, so we don't have enough money to run our schools, pay our teachers competitive salaries, do the maintenance and repair and training of the people who look after our schools. We have to find that money somewhere.
And Chief Mashano, just before we leave that area, this area of Minnow, Bemidjiwin, how would those expenditures assist your members in their pursuit of Minnow, Bemidjiwin?
Well, to start off, they would be living at a standard that is comparable with what's out in the municipalities and the rest of the province and the rest of Canada. That right now they're not. The standard of living on all reserves across Canada are less than what's in those municipalities. Even with the running water, because we're constantly in search for the money to keep those things running. So the standard of living would be better, maybe comparable to what's at the municipalities. But is that where you want to stay? Do you just want to stay where the municipalities are, or do you want to provide a better life for your people? I would prefer to make each successive generation in Biig Tagang better than the next. And I think that's the goal basically of every parent and every government, you know, right across this country, is that you want something better for your next generation. You want to have enough resources and material goods basically to give your kids a better start in life. If my bank account is empty, I spent it all just trying to make a living, buying food, paying rent, paying for the house, paying hydro. And when I die, I have nothing. The bank account is empty, or I even owe stuff. How is that helping that successive generation? But if I have something in that bank account, and I have a house that they can sell to get a start, those kids have got a start in life already. They don't have to fight for that. And I think that's what happens in all the non-Indigenous communities and parents across the country. They always try to put something together that they can leave for their children.
As an Anishinaabe person, how important is it to you to do what you can to ensure that future generations thrive?
Well, it's important to me, but I think it's important not only to Anishinaabe people, it's important to everybody and every person on this planet, basically, to see that the next generation does better.
We move to the topic of sharing now. And are you able to explain to us the concept of sharing as it is understood in Anishinaabe culture?
I'll try to explain that basically by going through some personal experiences, but I think generally speaking, what is meant by the whole idea of sharing in Anishinaabe culture is that you give someone something all the time if they're in need, but with the expectation that somewhere down the road, if you are having a hard time, that person would pay you back and help you as well. So there's always that reciprocity, that give and take all the time. And what I experienced in my lifetime in regards to sharing, I remember distinctly in my mind the guys getting a moose on the Pick River and pulling that moose up onto a field that was in the grass that was close to the river, and starting to butcher that. And then all the old ladies would come there with their little pails to get a chunk of meat. And it was shared like that. And I don't know, I see Elder Raymond over there. He probably remembers that in Pace Flats as well. And Elder Daniel there. You remember sharing like that? When we had something, we shared it. I remember another instance where Matt Michano walked up to Spruce Top Lake, and Spruce Top Lake is a long way, probably all day walk. And he shot a moose up there and he came home. And the next day he got the guys to come and give him a hand to go out and butcher that moose in the bush and bring it back. And everybody gets an equal share. Because you came and helped, you get an equal share. It wasn't, oh, I get the majority and you get this little chunk for giving me a hand. It's equally divided. And that's the way it is even today when we go out hunting. The person that shoots that moose is not the owner of that moose. We divide it. Whoever was in that party, it was, if there was two people, we divide it in half. And then those halves get shared between family members anyway. If there was 4 of us, we divide it in 4. We always share like that. And then when you get home, you have an old auntie over here who doesn't get any moose meat or doesn't have hunters in the family, you give them some.
What about sharing the tools of hunting like rifles?
Yep, and my friend Peter Moses basically told me about this because there's what they call the meat rifle. And they used to call those 30-30 rifles the meat rifle because it was shared among family members to go out hunting. because a lot of them couldn't afford to buy a rifle. So they shared that rifle. Can I borrow your rifle? I want to go hunt moose.
How does the concept of reciprocity fit into that, if at all?
Well, I think it does, because if you lend that guy that rifle, at some point, you're going to want a piece of that moose meat as well. So you give him that rifle to go and hunt. It's expected that he's going to give you some of that meat as well, because he used his rifle. And there's always that expectation that you do something for somebody, they're going to do something for you at some point.
Does the concept of balance have any role in the value system you've been described?
I think so, because I think the way our people think is that nobody should be getting more than what other people get. You share. That older aunt that's living down the road doesn't have anything. That older uncle can't hunt anymore. You always share, so you do have that balance of not somebody getting real rich and getting $1 million while the person down the road is starving.
I'm going to return to the subject of resource extraction now, Chief Machano, and focusing on what you've been able to witness in your own lifetime. And I appreciate you've told us about forestry and mining already to some extent. But I'm going to ask you questions about resource extraction on Big Dugong Nishnabeg's traditional territory. And we're going to look at another map.
I'm just looking at the time,
Yes.
Mr. Gover. I'm not sure how long this area is for you and whether this is, if you want to continue.
And the concise answer is it will take more than 10 minutes. And I do have a suggestion, actually, if we do break now, and that is to, with the court's permission, take an hour and a half. And what I'd suggest is we return in an hour, because I realize my friends haven't had an opportunity to meet Elder Goodchild, who's the next witness. So we could make use of that 30 minutes of the 90 minutes productively, if that meets with the court's approval.
I'll just look around, everybody. Is good.
Or I can tell time, it's 12:51.
Sure. So, but why, but maybe you need some, I'm not sure how much time people need to get food. I don't know what
Sure.
plans you've been making. 2 o'clock then.
2 o'clock
We'll
then,
come
and
back
then
at 2 and spend half an hour in greeting Elder Goodchild.
I think that would work well, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, that's very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take lunch.
All rise. This court will recess until 2 p.m.